Hello there, and welcome to UK Diesel and Electric Railway Modelling. And in this video I'll be showing you how to assemble this Extreme Etchings Class 33 roof fan from Shawplan. In true Blue Peter fashion, here's one I made earlier. To put this together, you'll need some solder, a piece of 0.5mm wire, some solder paste, an old paintbrush to apply it, a modelling scalpel, a microfile, a pair of tweezers, some clippers, a soldering iron. For this job it has a wide tip on it, and a piece of balsa wood. Let's take a quick look at the contents of the pack first. What you get is a piece of circular foil mesh and the roof fan and grill set plus the rings as a part of the roof fan. In this video we'll only be using the lower components. First thing we need to do is to clip off all the parts. The rest goes back in the pack with the mesh. The elements are numbered, so I arrange them with the cap and the highest numbers at the top working down to the lowest number at the bottom. Now I just need to clean them up by filing away the remains of the tabs that held them onto the fret. Don't press too hard while doing this, especially on the fan blades, because you don't want to bend them back. The last piece is the cap, and trying to file between the spokes is quite tricky. One slip of the file and you'll lop off a spoke. To avoid the chances of a mistake, I fold over them straight away. Just press a file over the edge and fold it over to the top of the cap. Now they're all folded over, I can file away the tabs without the chances of catching anything. Still be careful to only file between the folded parts. Now all the parts are filed, I can prepare to solder them all together. The first thing I do is pull off a piece of solder and wind it around a paintbrush like a coiled spring. You'll see why in a moment. For the soldering, I'll be working on a piece of balsa wood. If you look closely, you can see each part is numbered, and you'll start with number 1 working upwards layer by layer. You can see that on either side of the central hole there are 2 tiny ones. These are locating holes so everything lines up. Now you'll need the piece of wire. Cut a couple of short pieces off the end of it with some clippers. If you notice, one is longer than the other. Place ring number 1 on the balsa wood and push the pieces of wire into the small holes, with one taller than the other. Now I apply some solder paste and paint it over the ring. This allows the solder to spread over the edge, but it's a little sticky first, so it's good for holding the solder in place when you start off. Here's a neat little trick I have with the spiral of solder. I cut off 360 degrees worth and stick my finger on it and push it closed, giving it a nice ring of solder. And now, using the tweezers, we drop the ring of solder around the edge of the locating pins. Now we take number 2 and layer it over the solder. By having one pin over the other, it's a little easier to get one hole located, then wiggle until you can guide the other pin into the hole. So now, I have a solder sandwich. And now we take the soldering iron and lightly lay it over the top, allowing the heat to radiate through the metal. It will solder together very quickly. And now I've got to do it again. Another application of solder paste, which will spread like a liquid on the hot brass. Another ring of solder. Piece number 3. On the first couple of layers it's a little bit tricky, but once you have a couple of rings soldered up, it'll line up easier. And then the soldering iron again. And we continue layer by layer. Now, ring 5 has half-etched notches in it. I'll show you why shortly. Make sure the numbers and the notches point upwards and solder it together. Now we're on rings 6 and 7 with the first set of blades. Using a pair of pliers, carefully bend the blades to a roughly 45-degree angle. And now you can see why this is such a clever design. When laid over the top of each other, they interlace together to form a single 12-bladed fan. If you look closely, when the blades are bent, the roots are thicker than the metal. The notches allow the metal of the blades to project into the notches in the other layers. As before, we need some solder paste, another ring of solder. Drop the bladed ring 6 on the pins. Apply the soldering iron as normal. Once the next layer of solder is on, we come to the tricky part. When you place it on, the blades of ring 7 have to interlock between the blades of ring 6. This takes a bit of effort twisting and bending things, and you're almost certainly going to need your fingers. As a result, let the metal cool down for a couple of minutes, because fingers and hot metal are a bad combination. On this occasion, I had to bend the blades to a steep angle to get them to go on. And then, once in place, you apply the soldering iron again. More solder paste and a solder ring later, and we're ready for ring 8. This ring needs to be placed down with the number on the top and the notches on the underside pointing down. You'll notice that as I work up the layers, it takes longer and longer for the solder to melt. This is because we have more and more metal that the heat has to radiate through, so it takes longer for the metal to get to the temperature in which the solder will melt. Also, because the heat is being applied for longer, the balsa will burn slightly. Just blow the smoke away. Once ring 12 is soldered on, we need to fit the cap, and we don't need the locating pins anymore. Snip them off with your clippers and file the top flat. For the cap, I put a double spiral of solder because there's a larger contact area to be fixed down. There's a cavity on the inside of the cap. This is where I want the solder to be. It takes quite a while for the solder to melt, so be careful you don't put too much pressure on the cap because you'll end up with a dent. Once the cap is soldered, it takes several minutes for the metal to cool down to a temperature to be able to handle it. A quick way is to run it under a tap for a moment or two. Once it's cool, stick your knife under it and it will pop off. As you can see, it's actually burnt right into the balsa. Because of this, there's a fair amount of burnt material on the fan, so I wash it under the tap with a toothbrush and some detergent to clean it up. Don't scrub too hard because you might bend the blades. Now it's all clean, the blades need to be reprofiled so they line up horizontally, but also that the blades are all at the same angle. At the roots, they need to be quite steep. On the Class 33s, the blades spiral like the propeller of an aeroplane, so the root is steep, but the tips are almost flat. To do this, I wedge the tweezers between the blades at the root and twist it flat at the tip with a pair of pliers. Once you're done, just follow around the edge, tweaking the tips so they line up. And now you can see that it all lines up nicely. Finally, clip off the pins on the underside and file it nice and flat. And now we have a nice completed roof fan.